storm. But I want to thank Charlie Persinger, and I also want to thank the West Monona Community School District for really helping us set this up and being real flexible so that we could continue to do this meeting and have everybody come here. So thank you all for coming, and thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk about Blue Lake. My name's Ben Wallace. I'm the fisheries biologist for the Iowa DNR. Blue Lake is within my management district, and so really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Now my goal tonight is to kind of do four things: go through a very, very brief history of Blue Lake, talk about our lake restoration prioritization and planning process, really focus on dredge planning and execution, because I think that's on a lot of people's minds, and talk about lake levels and groundwater conditions, not just of Blue Lake, but also in the region. And so the things that I'm going to present to you, it's not just stuff from me. I have representatives from wildlife, law enforcement, parks, forestry, and the lake restoration program here. We just thought with me presenting it, just one person, be a little bit more efficient. So what I'd like to do is get through all this, and then stick around and answer as many questions as you might have. And we can all kind of help answer questions that depend on what those questions are. So again, thanks for being here. Blue Lake, as most of you probably know, it's an oxbow lake created from a meandering cutoff of the Missouri River. So this is a sovereign lake. So this is one of the lakes in Iowa that was here when Iowa entered into statehood. So the oxbow lakes and the glacially formed lakes up in northwest Iowa are all considered sovereign lakes. Just a history on dredging, just because we're going to talk about dredging here in the future a little bit later, is there's been a dredging effort in the 50s, as well as the 80s, and then here recently. And so that map that you see there, that's the old map from the 1916 survey where the Highway Commission went and surveyed all the Iowa lakes and lake beds. So the Lake Restoration Program was formed in the early 2000s. Blue Lake was prioritized as one of the original 35 lakes to be included in the Lake Restoration Program. So we have 139 significant publicly owned lakes in the state of Iowa. And the Lake Restoration Program was tasked with narrowing that down, because there's only so much money to go around, narrow that down to the lakes that were prioritized to receive that initial round of funding and the initial efforts through that program. So it is a statewide program to improve water quality and habitat in publicly owned lakes. And you know, one thing that we really do with the Lake Restoration Program is we're not just looking at the lake, we're looking at kind of a holistic approach, the watershed and the lake and everything that impacts the lake. So Blue Lake was included in that original 35. It was because it was impaired for poor water clarity, and it was also a good candidate for restoration. So some of these lakes, you know, to be a good candidate, it had to be, you know, kind of in bad shape and in need of restoration, but the feasibility and the possibility of success also had to be there. Some lakes are more difficult to deal with than others, and anyways, Blue Lake kind of fit the bill for this program. So here's the timeline of all the things that have happened at Blue Lake. Started with the TMDL. The TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. That's what we do to assess all the pollutants that are coming into the lake and how much we would have to reduce that to achieve our water quality goals. Another big thing is the diagnostic and feasibility study. That's done, again, that looks at all the major issues in the watershed in the lake, but that offers much more specific details on different things that can be done to address those issues. So those two things are a very common start in the lake restoration planning process. Another big kind of milestone is the formation of a steering committee that's formed up of individuals from the local community that take the information and work with the DNR and our other stakeholders and partners, like the NRCS, the county conservation boards, anybody else that might have a stake in Blue Lake. So the local community worked with those agencies to kind of identify the things that they wanted to see get done at Blue Lake that were within the realm of possibilities identified in the diagnostic and feasibility study. And then throughout the time, again, this is just showing kind of all the different things that we've done. There's been a lot of studies to understand this lake, and I hope that you see that we've studied this lake very hard, and also some construction projects. So out of that diagnostic and feasibility study, there's 4 major tasks that were really kind of called out to improve water quality and work towards our restoration goals. That was to remove and exclude carp from the lake. There was a fish renovation, chemical renovation in 2006 using rotenone to eradicate the fish. Unfortunately, they did re-enter the lake during high water. But after the lake restoration process got going and we got funding, we were able to put a bunch of fish barriers in place to help mitigate the introduction of more, or the immigration of more common carp into the lake system. We've also did a 4-year study here assessing the biomass of the rough fish in hopes that we could try to use commercial fishing as a means to, in the future, somehow make an impact on the common carp population. Another major task was reduce nutrient and sediment transport to the lake from the watershed. One of the big projects that came out of that was digging out the old pond or the bay there at Noboa Bay. That's also where some fish barrier projects went in. Because that bay there intercepts water from the McCandless Cleghorn ditch, and so offers that water some time to settle out some sediments and nutrients before it gets passed on to the lake. And then also another major thing was reducing shoreline erosion and stabilizing water levels. So the shoreline erosion was addressed in some areas through extensive shoreline armoring. At the beach there, a seawall was built with a handicap accessible kind of ramp down into the beach, kind of a novel approach there to address erosion and access issues. And some pumping studies were done on the old pump, and then the pump infrastructure that you may be familiar with, the pump that can supply supplemental water to the lake. There's some effort put into that. And then finally, reduce wind, resuspension, and sediments through targeted dredging. This is the one I want to focus on a lot today, because I think what we're hearing from the community is maybe we shouldn't dredge, or dredging caused an issue with the water levels. So what I really want to do is kind of take you through this and show you how we've kind of studied this system, the things that we looked at to ensure that we weren't going to cause any harm. And so we're going to get into that here. So the first thing we do is look at the hydrologic budget of the lake. We want to determine the effect of hydraulic dredging. So hydraulic dredging, for those that aren't familiar with it, you have a barge out on the lake. On the end of that barge is a pipe with a cutter head. It stirs up the lake bottom and creates a slurry. So it's a mix of water and sediment, kind of a sludge. That material is then sucked up through that pipe and sent to a containment site. It is by and large the most efficient means of removing sediment from a lake. Much, much cheaper than mechanical dredging. When I say mechanical dredging, what I mean by that is excavators, typically bulldozers if it's somewhat dry. We've had very little success in the few times that that's been tried. It's extremely expensive. So hydraulic dredging is by and large the most efficient means to remove sediment from a lake bottom. So again, determine the effect of hydraulic dredging, look at all the sources and losses of water, and one thing that we found in that studying process is that the lake is in equilibrium with the groundwater. And the general direction of the groundwater at Blue Lake is from northeast to southwest. And that holds true for just about all of the Oxbow lakes on our side, on the Iowa side of the Missouri River in this drainage basin. So when the groundwater levels rise, the lake rises. When the groundwater levels drop, the lake drops. Just to kind of depict that, what you see here is a cross-section of the underlying geology. The points up in the upper right, the yellow is equal to this area over here, and this yellow spot here is equal to roughly where the Missouri Channel, River Channel is. And so what you see is the water generally drops in elevation as it gets closer to the river. And that's how the groundwater moves through the system. And so that's a good thing to understand and to keep in mind. Right now, roughly, the water level is sitting about right here. And if you look up just a little bit, that is where what we would call full pool, elevation 1042. So we're about 5 foot below crest right now. Likewise, we're about 5 foot, the groundwater surrounding Blue Lake is about 5 foot low. So Blue Lake, it's a 1,570 acre feet at full pool. That's volume. So 1 acre foot is an acre of water a foot deep. So just over 1,500 acre feet at full pool. Through that hydrologic budget study, then we also understand some other things. Monthly summer evaporation alone is about 183 acre feet a month. That's 12% of the lake volume we lose every month during the summer under normal conditions. And also the largest source of flux is seepage into the ground. So due to the sandy soils along the shoreline that's exposed right now, that's very sandy, that's where the greatest water loss occurs. So it's no surprise that when the lake is fuller, water is lost quicker through that material. There's more surface area for it to make contact with, the material is more porous. So our total monthly water loss is about 305 acre-feet of water. So about 20% of the lake water volume we lose every month through groundwater seepage, through evaporation. But the other important thing to remember is that water is also coming in through the ground, provided that the water elevation on the upstream side is high enough, to push that water in. So that's what we mean, like the lake is at equilibrium with the surrounding groundwater. So in those initial studies, one thing we did was we took some borings into the lake, because dredging was a very important thing that the steering committee from the community pointed out that they wanted to see done at Blue Lake. So we did some initial lake bed borings to see what the underlying material was, because one thing we did hear from the steering committee is there was a concern of getting into a sand layer or exposing some material that could cause an increase in water loss or maybe a connection to another aquifer. So 6 boring locations, there was 3 borings done at each of those 6 locations on the right in the north to south fashion. Can't get my laser pointer to work, but you can see where those are highlighted in the picture on the right. The photo on the left, what that shows is the predicted sand exposure if we did a 19-foot dredge depth, or a dredge cut down to 19 feet. And so yellow is yellow and orange are sand and gravel. That's a higher hydraulic conductivity. Water can move faster through that. So that's a little bit too deep right there. This is what it looks like with a sand exposure average cut of 10 foot of depth. And so we're staying above those sand layers that we're concerned about. So with that in mind, we narrowed the scope of our dredging concept even further to the southern end, because the northern end was the areas that were dredged previously, like the middle and the northern part. We worked with a company called Terracon to conduct electroresistivity surveys. This is very common practice in archaeology, mining, engineering. It's very similar to sonar, but it uses electric currents to tell us what types of materials are down deep. This is not something that we normally do on dredging projects. This is the only dredging project that I've been involved with where we employed this. This was an extra layer of study, an extra layer of assurance to make sure that we were going in and doing things in a calculated way. So they completed 41 transects in both the north-south and east-west direction. And those layers that they found pretty much corroborated the borings that were conducted in the 2010 study that was published in 2011. And so just an example of what a cross-section of one of those surveys looks like is on the left. And what you see there in the red is more sand and gravel. As it turns to green and blue, you have more silts and clays. Thus, the silts and clays are the types of material that we want to take out. Those are more than likely materials that were brought in, and it's kind of filled the lake in. And also, though, those are the materials that are much smaller in size and do a much better job at holding water. And so that is what one of those looks like. When you put them together, all 42 of those together, you can develop a 3D model. And so Terracon developed sediment mapping for the entire area of interest. And so what this map shows is the number of feet of silt and clay on the bottom of the lake. So what you'll notice on the far right, where it's real red, is there's pretty much almost no silt or clay above the surface. It's mostly sand right there. And as you move westward, it starts to drop off. So we narrowed our scope of work even further based on that work. And so what you see here is the actual dredge design and cut overlaid on that ER resistivity data. And so within that then, we designed the dredging to keep a minimum of 2 foot of silt, or silt clay mix, over any sand layer. So when we have the dredging designs, we tell the dredger, you can't take enough, or you can't take more material than and expose that sand. we want to leave at least 2 feet of that silt clay on top of that sand layer. Because again, that silt clay is what kind of keeps the water from moving through. So we got under contract, got a favorable, pretty good price on dredging. The dredging started in 2022. The dredge machine was guided by GPS from Iowa DNR survey control. And that accuracy then was checked after the first 2 weeks of dredging, just to make sure that everything is lining up like it's supposed to. Now here's an important thing. If the operator sensed a change in material, then it was checked on the ground by a consulting engineer with physical sampling. Now when I say sensed a change, these dredge operators cannot see what is going on down there. But what they can do is they can tell when the material changes based on how hard their pumps are working, based on sound coming through the pipes. Like if there's rattling, that's a good indication that there's rock and stuff coming through. So they're watching that, and they know when the materials change, they know how their machines respond. So when they hit something that they think may be different, we called out the consulting engineer. They went on site, took actual samples to ensure that we weren't getting into sand-dominated layers. And at no point did we. So again, we were constantly ground truthing things and double checking our work. Again, and then in the dredging contract, in order for them to get paid, their dredge cuts had to be plus or minus 6 inches of the design boundary. That's pretty tight. When you look at the size of the machine and you look at what they're working with, those are pretty tight constraints, and they were able to do it. So I mentioned that hydraulic dredging, we pump a slurry. That material's got to go somewhere. So with all these hydraulic dredging projects, we have to build a containment site. Some people call it a spoil site, and we got to manage that water. So the containment site was built nearby on a wildlife area, just to the west of where the dredging took place. So that includes, building dikes, building dams, and a return water structure. So the idea behind this is that water, sludge slurry mixture, is pumped to the containment site. That water is given time for those materials to settle out, and then the water returns back to the lake. That water, those dredge operators have to watch that return water and make sure that it's a better water quality coming to the lake than what's returning. They have to take daily logs on that. So you have to let that water sit there for a little bit for the sediment to drop out and return to the lake. Now the containment site obviously needed to fill up before it could flow back to the lake. So there is a lag time where we are pumping water and pumping material out of Blue Lake, and it's not coming back in. So in anticipation of that, we ran the pump. So again, once the containment site fills, that water is returned to the lake, and that water equation balances. Water out equals water in. Again, there's a lag time there. So the pump was proactively, the auxiliary pump that we have was proactively started about 1 month prior to dredging. So that we're bringing water in to kind of account for that water that's not coming back in until the return water starts flowing. Okay, that pump ran at full capacity from early March to mid-July while that dredging was occurring, but a cone of depression formed. And so it had to be shut down and it had to be reduced in terms of operating capacity. So if you're not familiar with this, a cone of depression forms when you suck too much water around your well and you start sucking all the water in around you. And what happened with our pump that we have is it started sucking air. And pumps can't, a water pump, it's not good for it to suck air. So we had to shut that down. It was shutting down on its own, so we had to dial back what that water was pumping. That pump ran at reduced flow until the dredging ended, but then it was shut down to prevent any further cavitation. And also, when these things happen, when this cone of depression happens, there's a real concern about our impact to our neighbors in that well. There's drinking water wells in that area, there's agricultural wells in that area, and so that's something that we have to be mindful of. So that's the effort that we went into to kind of study the dredging and understand what we were getting into and make sure that we weren't causing any issues. The next thing I want to do is kind of take a regional look at what we're dealing with in terms of water. So maybe you've heard me say this before, but I say it again because it's true. Natural lakes are an expression, a surface expression of the groundwater. That's what streams are as well. That gives you a very good idea of where that groundwater is. Water is running downhill, even underground, unless it hits an impermeable layer, but in this case we don't have that. And it daylights at the lake, and then it moves on through the ground. So I want to keep that in mind on this groundwater, how it affects these lakes in this region. And I want to go through some lakes in the region. One thing I hear a lot about is Browns Lake, and we're pumping a bunch of water at Browns Lake. Why aren't you doing it here at Blue? And so I'd like to go through that a little bit. Browns Lake is also an out-of-school lake. It's up near Sioux City, nearest the town of Salix. It experienced low water when the drought started back in about late 21, 22. It's important to note that no dredging occurred at this lake. We do have a supplemental water supply there, but the important thing to note is this is Mid-American Energy Company that supports or supplies that water. The DNR doesn't pay for it, the county doesn't pay for it, private individuals or communities around the lake do not pay for it. This is Mid-American Energy. And this water comes from an already permitted surface intake as part of their normal plant operations. Several decades ago, they put in some infrastructure that allowed them to take water out of the river, use it for the plant operation, and then they could either shunt it back to the river, or by opening the gate, they shunt it to the lake. So it's no cost to them. They're pumping this water anyways, and it's no cost to send it to the lake versus the river. So they send it to the lake. In the end, it ends up in the river anyways through the ground. But Browns Lake gets it for a little bit. But even with Mid-American Energy pumping, we were still experiencing low lake levels. So that led Mid-American Energy to investigate their pump operations. I'm just going to show you a few pictures of Browns Lake prior to what they did with their pump upgrades. So the photo on the left, that green cone kind of shows you the angle and the field of view that you're looking at. And the photo on the right is taken from a drone. And so you can see that much of the lake bed here was dry, it was greatly reduced. The lake was about 5 foot low, so very similar to Blue Lake. Here's another image. This is about half the lake surface acreage here was high and dry. The channel that connects the two arms of the lake was drying up. And then here's the boat ramp, and you can see that the water receded quite a bit from the boat ramp. Some excavation was done at the bottom of the boat ramp just to try to get a little bit of a connection. That's why you see the water up to that one lane on the ramp. So water levels continued to drop even as improvements were made. So going through this, Mid-American Energy, they were pumping approximately 1,250 gallons a minute, and water levels were dropping. They fixed a valve blockage, and they improved the flow to about 2,500 gallons per minute. So that's the second green on the right is kind of when that occurred. Water levels were still dropping after 2,000 gallons a minute. They did go offline and made some adjustments to their flow, or going offline, adjust the flow to zero. They got shut down once in a while for maintenance. Water levels stopped during that time, or started dropping. But then they did make some additional repairs, and they had water flowing at 7,500 gallons per minute. So that's a little more than 3 times what that pump at Blue Lake can handle, and water levels were still dropping. What we learned, so even with water levels dropping, we started looking at the underlying geology, and this gave us a lot of insight into these oxbow lakes. Well, the water was discharging into the west arm. The water was discharging here, and it was going right into the ground. All the water that was standing was over on this side of the lake. So this water wasn't even traveling over to the water because it was going right back into the ground. So what we did was we worked with a consulting firm to look at the underlying geology and what's going on there. And what they found is that the east arm had a lot less porous material, the silts and clays that we're talking about. And the west arm was dominated by sandy soils, and so the water that was being pumped in was going right back in. And you can see it on this groundwater level profile. Again, traveling from northeast to southwest is the groundwater. It's coming in, it daylights at the lake, and it starts to drop precipitously. You see a hump right here. The only reason this hump is here is because water was being pumped in and it was just going down into the ground. It was disappearing as fast as it was being pumped in. And then it drops as you go towards the Missouri River. Again, all of our oxbow lakes are doing that. So one thing that Mid-American Energy did was they extended their pipeline and their discharge location to the east arm of the lake. They got their flow rates up to about between 12 and 15,000 gallons per minute. It's an astronomical amount of water. And now they're pumping into the east arm. With that, they can bring the lake up a couple of feet. To this day, the lake is still several feet low, because what happens is when that water gets high enough, it starts to creep into that west part of the lake and it goes right back into the ground. And so what I want you to understand is even with this volume of pumping, there are still limitations to adding water to this lake due to the underlying geology and the low groundwater that we're experiencing in the region right now. So there's a before and after of the boat ramp. And if you look at that one house in the structure just below it, you see that dark line. That's the shoreline there. So that's the lake, again, is still holding several feet low. Snyder Bend is another one I hear a lot about. Again, we've never done any, we haven't recently done any dredging activities at Snyder Bend. That also has a supplemental water supply. That also comes from Mid-American Energy. So we have a very unique situation here where we have this very large private industry that can deliver water to these two different lakes. The difference between the water that's supplied to Snyder Bend versus Browns Lake is that the water that's supplied to Snyder Bend generally only runs when energy is being produced. And they are not burning coal as much as they used to because they've switched a lot to wind energy. They can put a massive amount of water into Snyder Bend. You know, at minimum, they can get, 200 million gallons of water a day. That's almost half of Snyder Bend's lake volume. But it still takes some time to fill that lake up. And as soon as those pumps shut off, the lake starts dropping down again. So depending on what time of year you go to that lake, it's rising and falling with the water that's being pumped in. And because it's so close to the Missouri River, it's rising and falling a lot with the Missouri River as well. So again, here's just a few pictures. This was a while back when it was really dry. Badger Lake, here's another lake system. No dredging activities, no supplemental water supply. Last we checked, it was bone dry. I don't know what it, with this recent rains, it might have some sheet water out there. 40 Lake, no dredging activities, no supplemental water supply. Again, pretty light, dry lake basin. I hesitate to say it's dry right now because again, we got quite a bit of rain in the last couple of days. But let's look outside this region. Let's look outside the Oxbow Lakes. We go inland a little bit to these glacial lakes. Here's an example here, South Twin Lake. South Twin Lake has a maximum depth of 5.5 feet. There's no dredging activities that have been conducted here. There's no supplemental water supply. It was sheet water in 2023, and in 2024 it dried up completely, bone dry. It has sheet water in it again now this spring after some rainfalls. Blackhawk Lake. This is the lake where dredging did occur about the same time the Blue Lake did, for 2 years, in 2022 and 2023. We don't have a supplemental water supply here at Blackhawk Lake either. On the left is a hydrograph of the lake levels in Blackhawk Lake going back to 1970. And what you will see is several periods of drought, occurring about once every 10 to 12 years or so. Some were worse than others. Some droughts only lasted a year, others lasted several years. What I will point out is in the 1970s, right here, the lake levels dropped so much that the sensor became out of water and they couldn't read the lake levels. But local accounts say it got a little over 4 feet below crest and held there for a couple of years. What I want to highlight is on the right end of that hydrograph where I have that red box. That corresponds to the other graph that you see on the right here. These are water levels in Blackhawk Lake going back to 2020. Those purple shaded areas are when dredging occurred. So we did it in 2 phases. We did about half the dredging in 2022 and the other half in 2023 under drought conditions. The first dredging effort, our water levels actually rose while we were dredging. Second dredging effort, they dropped. What I'm getting at is when we have water leaving the lake from the dredge, but we also have water returning, it's pretty much a no net gain or loss, roughly. And so the water levels are acting independently of that, and they're driven by, the climatic conditions in the region, the rainfall and the groundwater. If we look at a broader scale, and we'll go beyond lakes, this wasn't too long ago that this was a real major issue. 5 counties just to the south and southeast of here were under emergency orders with water. The regional water, in some cases, couldn't even supply all their customers. And this headline reads, one of the communities affected is Avoca. It said that if nothing changes within 36 hours, both the Avoca water tower and the regional water tower will be completely drained. They had to take emergency measures because they were pulling water out of the ground as their water source, and it got to the point where they couldn't supply enough, and they couldn't supply their customers. So I want to take all like what we talked about, and just kind of summarize this and bring this back and take some time for questions. What I hope you see is that we have and we will continue to invest in this resource. And when I say this resource, I don't just mean Blue Lake. I mean Lewis and Clark State Park, the wildlife management areas that are around it. Where practical, there are some things that we do not have control over, that are too costly, that are not feasible to handle. But we have, over the last decade or so, invested a lot of money, over $4 million, into this lake system in an effort to make it better. And like I said, we will continue to do that, and we will continue to look for opportunities to do that. One thing I've heard a lot of is that we poked a hole in the lake, in the bottom of the lake. I can appreciate that sentiment, I really can. It's frustrating. When we have low water levels, it's frustrating because you cannot use the lake system like you're used to. You can't use the boat ramp. Lake homeowners, their docks go out to nothing but dry sand or dry lake bottom. The things that you normally do, you're not able to do. I get that because I experience it back home on the lakes that I recreate on, that I live close by. I travel to all kinds of lakes in my 12-county district. And we're just now starting to climb out. We have some lakes that have finally reached full pool, others that are in pretty tough shape yet. But again, we're confident that we did not poke a hole in the bottom of the lake. Based on all the research that we did leading up to dredging, based on the fact that Blue Lake, the water levels are sitting at the same level as the groundwater around it, which is what we expect and anticipate. It's very normal for the lake. What I do want to show is on that left-hand side, that's a 1930s aerial photo. I outlined in blue where the water was. You might think I'm crazy here, but I'm going to tell you, we see more surface water out there on that lake now because we conducted hydraulic dredging. Because we brought the lake bottom down to where when the lake levels or the groundwater does drop, we're allowing that water to daylight. So on the right-hand side, this is a recent photo, it's 2023, not 24, but we get these images about a year after. And so there's a lot more surface acres of water out there during a severe drought compared to what there used to be. And again, I want to take a step back and look at this region. Blue Lake is experiencing the same issues as all the other oxbow lakes in the Missouri River Valley. Now granted, Blue Lake is lower than a lot of them. Some would be just as low as Blue Lake if they weren't receiving that massive amount of water from Mid-American Energy. Others have gotten some really timely rains, and so that's just kind of the way it falls on the way on how it rains. If we look back at the drought monitor, this is October of 21. I use October because that's the start of the water year. When people monitor drought, when they look at things like that, they start it in October. And part of the reason for that is because we're at base flows, and then all the the snowfall that's yet to come is being held on the ground and not released into the system yet through the thawing action in the spring. So here we are in fall of 2021. Things weren't too bad. This is also about the time we went under contract for the dredging operation. We got somebody under contract, got that contract approved, and they were slated to start the spring of the following year. Here's 2022, drought sets in by fall of 2022. Severe drought in this particular area. 23, drought continues. 24, it continues, a little better than the year before. But then here we are, this is data going back to 2 days ago. So the state is climbing out of a drought, but unfortunately we are still in a large part of that drought area. And the reason why I wanted to show you those successive years is because 1 year of drought is easier to recover from than 5 years of drought. Every year that goes by below average rainfall, the groundwater levels drop. They spike back up in the spring with a little bit of snow melt and some rain, but then they continue to drop even more. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The longer that goes on, the harder it is for us to recover from that, and the more rain events we need to get that groundwater recharged. So yes, we're aware we have a pump at Blue Lake. It has limitations, especially in drought conditions. In fact, past studies have shown that in drought conditions, it really can't do anything for us. And when we talk about pumping water out of the ground from the same aquifer that that water is going right back into, we need to be mindful of cost and money, because it costs money to run that pump. To pump that water out of the ground and to have it go into the lake and go right back into the ground where it came from is not, in my opinion, a wise use of water. And so that's something we have to be mindful of. Especially when you think about drinking water wells and irrigation wells and stuff in the area and our impacts that we can have on that. What I can tell you is that we are working with a consulting firm to develop some guidance on the pump operation that we do have. Because there are certain situations where it might make sense to run the pump. And those situations include when that lake is a little bit higher and the groundwater is high, so that it can recharge the area around the well where it's drawing water and the water doesn't leave as fast. Then we're able to kind of like top the lake off. But that's what we're working with them on. We got some things installed today. There's got to be a few more repairs made. But then we're getting a flow meter installed on there because we have estimates of what the flow is out of that pump based on the pump curve. But we don't know what it's actually pumping out because we don't have a flow meter on there yet. And that's getting put on there. I say it's waiting to be delivered. That's a misstatement. It's waiting to be installed. We have it. So with that, I will take questions as long as you need to. I also have people from other parts of the department that can help me answer questions. If you're not comfortable asking questions in a public forum, my contact information is right there, and you can contact me separately. I'd be happy to answer your questions. Outside.
Thank you, Ben. My name is Jeff Sander. I've had some conversations with you, I guess emails mostly. Nathan, Karen, I think everybody at the DNR. I'm as equally upset about the conditions of Blue Lake as everybody. I didn't vote. But I understand the water level issues. I mean, I made it rain so you can thank me for that.
I noticed that, you know, on the way in here, I thought, Jeff Sander must have said something.
Rain, so what the heck?
Yeah.
But at any rate, my concerns go to wildlife probably more than anybody. I've met with Nathan. I hope you guys take care of him. You got your first grade dude right there. I'm very pleased with him, so take a bow and then get your ass back to work. But, the condition of the area is what was really, I think, compounding a lot of this problem.
Sure.
You turn off the highway, or even before that, as soon as you hit the lake, the entire area, I wish you'd dredged a little farther south. I mean, I didn't want to impact the road, but a little farther south would have been nice, even though it would make the pond maybe even a little smaller maybe. But I used to fish on that when I was a kid. You could sit there and fish in Blue Lake all day, but now it's a forest down there.
Yeah.
So by the time you enter the east side of Blue Lake and drive down the Eastern Road, I guess is now a county road. I understand wildlife's issues. I visited with them guys today,
Yeah.
but it's unsightly.
Yeah. So.
It's just, that's maybe my biggest issue.
Okay.
We got a legislator and a senator sitting here. I will mention to them that everybody I've talked to has talked about funding, and I know they need the money, but I'd like to see a couple bucks go back into Blue Lake.
Sure.
I mean, I think we need it. But I'd like to see some of that area along the road given a little more authority to parks. I think Nathan has expressed he'd be more than willing to maintain that property along the road. So that would help a lot. The rest of the lake, fishery or wildlife, I don't know if anyone's here that cut the trees out of the old fisheries or the old
Oh, the fish trap.
yeah, the old fish trap, thank you. We used to go out there in the evening when our kids was little, and there'd just be cars lined up watching the wildlife. Then they planted all of those scab trees, I mean, they were any kind of evergreen that anybody would want, and just cut both sides off. And I see wildlife backside cut them down on at least the south side. Last I noticed, the north side was still there. But what a blessing, and big meadows out there being maintained.
Yeah.
To be able to go out there and watch wildlife. And, you know, I'm with the hunting area, but
So,
aesthetics is a big part of Lewiston Park. It's a historic park.
yeah. No, I hear you. And
Thank you.
I'm going to try to paraphrase what you just said, just so everybody can make sure everybody can hear you. Mr. Sanders' concerns were more just in general with the overall condition of the park. Some unsightly things as you come in, and then you know, blocking the field of vision on some of the routes through the park. I'll just kind of make a general comment on that. With the low water, we obviously have a lot of plant life that's growing in the exposed lake bed. I don't know if some of that is what you're referring to, but
Just along the road even.
along the road, okay. About the plants growing in the exposed lake bed though. A lot of volunteer trees out there. Our wildlife folks went out and mowed them down last year in a lot of areas. Obviously they come back. One thing we talked about doing was doing some herbicide applications in the fall so they won't come back. Fall is the best time to do that to make sure that they won't come back. So that's something that we're talking about there. Again, that may not have been included exactly with what your thoughts were, but it sounds like you've had some constructive talks with Nathan. What I can tell you is we work with the resources that we're given, and our folks around here do a pretty good job. And Doug, it sounds like you've had some talks with the wildlife folks.
Yes.
And expressed some of those concerns. And so these are things that we'll, you know, kind of discuss together and see where we can help each other out. So I'm glad you've had those constructive talks, and yeah, we're going to keep doing whatever we can to kind of improve not just the lake situation, but the aesthetics of the park. Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Smith. I've had the pleasure of working with past governors and senators, representatives in the state of Iowa. A number of years ago, we passed sustainable conservation funding. But one thing that hasn't been done, it has not been funded by the Senate, by the House, or by the present governor for that matter. And as far as park management goes, a lot of the individuals we did have across the state managing parks and the aesthetic value, a lot of them were transferred over into CPO training, conservation police officers. So there isn't necessarily the staff there that used to be there. But that is associated with funding. And if you don't have the funding, what do you do? My other question to you is, just recently, Port Neal, they did a biometric study of the river. Did you look at the elevation studies, surface elevation studies that they've done, compiled over a 40-year period as it relates to that river? Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. Are you talking about for planning for the dredging operation?
No, when they were having issues with their intake, they weren't able to get sufficient water like they used to.
Oh, you're talking about the Mid-American Energy.
There you go.
Yes, okay.
Did you look at that data?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Okay, well then you know that if you looked at the 40-year accumulation of data, that is there, 40 years, every 10 years we lose 2 feet of surface elevation in that river. The very same river that's taking the water out, that comes into this lake, heads that way. Now, if you can imagine if you lose 8 feet subsurface-wise, and we are experiencing drought, it's only compounded the effects and the management capabilities that our agency has to deal with.
Right.
It makes it next to impossible. You don't have enough money to fix that problem. That problem can only be solved by the Army Corps of Engineers, who is at the directive of Senate and representatives in DC. They just don't get to go out there and do what they want. Congress authorizes them to do X, they do X. So what I'm telling you is, it's just isn't this lake, it's this region as a whole, from north to south. If you look at all our oxbows, they are sand bottoms. That's all related to the river. I don't care if you put 5 wells up there. It isn't going to replace the water that is being sucked out by the river as it degrades out. In order to solve our long-term problems, it is my opinion that we have to address on the federal level the Army Corps of Engineers management abilities of that river. Because it greatly affects, I mean, we have a multi-million-dollar recreational asset here, and every one of them is a sandbox. It's a sandbox. Just to give you, I read an article probably 3 weeks ago. Just in the state of Arkansas, on a daily basis, waterfowling alone generates $1 billion. $1 billion. It's pretty depressing when you get to look at a sandbox. You can't float a boat, you can't throw a rod, and you can't even ride four-wheelers out there because motorized vehicles are prohibited, but that's what they're best used for today. I was wondering if the DNR, in general, the director as well, had taken the initiative. I mean, you can go all the way back to 2011, every flood we had. And I remember Governor Branstad, when he withdrew from Juarez, said the state is going to develop its own plan for the use of the Missouri River. Its own plan. Let me tell you, it's been 11 years plus. I have yet to read that plan. And he immediately said it after he withdrew from Juarez. One of the biggest things that we've neglected here is it just isn't Blue Lake, you know, as much as it is a prized item. It's all the other areas around it. If you look around it as we go out to the river, if they're neglected and degraded in sandboxes, it's not too long before Blue Lake is going to be the same if we don't address the big gorilla in the room, and that is the river issue. With that,
Thanks, Bill. And just for those that, for clarification, when Bill was talking about elevation dropping, when the Corps realigned the river, increased the velocities to create depth, creates down cutting, the river bottom drops, so the surface elevation drops with it. And yeah, the closer you are to the river, the more that river affects these oxbow lakes. Snyder Bend is a really great example because it is right next to the river, and it rises and falls, very much so, in response to what the river's doing. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if they could extend the boat ramp so we could at least use the,
Yeah, boat ramp, okay.
I mean, to me, that seems, so we could at least use them.
Yeah. So the question was, wondered if we could extend the boat ramps so we can continue to use the lake. We did extend them to a degree with gravel, like a gravel ramp, so that boats could get in. That's about as much as we have done in terms of ramp extension. That's something we can look at to see if that's an opportunity. I do hesitate to encourage large craft to go out there right now, just because of how shallow it is. But that's something we can talk about. Thanks. Yes?
So at the beginning of the meeting, you were saying that the community, my name is Casey Curry. At the beginning of the meeting, you were saying the community wanted the lake dredged.
Yeah.
Can you give us a why? I might have missed that.
Oh, okay. So the question was related to when I referenced the steering committee that was formed many years ago when this planning process started, and the community wanted the lake dredged. And I think your question is why did they want that?
Yeah, why did the community want it dredged? I didn't really pick that up.
Sure. So why did the community want to dredge? What I can tell you is, so I wasn't involved like that early on, but what I can tell you is every lake restoration that I've been involved with, the first and foremost thing on people's minds is dredging the lake. And the reason for that is there's thought that making it deeper, having more water will automatically improve water quality. That's not entirely true. There are times where it can have an impact and a positive impact. One of the reasons that we deepen the lake is to reduce the amount of area where wind and wave action, so the energy from that, can drive down and pick up that sediment and resuspend it. So the deeper you go, the more that wind and wave energy dissipates, and the less chance it has to stir up bottom. Another reason why people really like to dredge is that it tends to increase the usable area of a lake, especially like during times of drought. Times of extreme drought, it's kind of a moot point, but that is by and large the number one thing that people ask for. In fact, we have walked into communities where they said, only dredge or don't do anything, and so we walk away. Because dredging isn't the only answer when it comes to these lake improvement projects. It's watershed improvement, it's looking at the shorelines, it's working with communities to get off septic, so that septic, we don't have leach fields going into lakes. So it's addressing the rough fish populations in the lake, and dredging can definitely be a part of it. But yeah, that was something that the community wanted.
Also, thank you to the DNR for taking time out of your evening to come here and talk to us about this. It's really, really appreciated.
Absolutely. So I do appreciate the opportunity to come out here and talk about that. My contact information is there. Like I said, you can reach out to me at any time. That's my cell phone number. So feel free to call it. Some of you already have it. Use it again if you want to. If it's something that I can't answer, I'll put you in touch with our park manager or our wildlife biologist or our lake restoration program coordinator. Another thing I want to be very clear about is I'm not in charge of any of those people. I'm just up here talking like on behalf of all of us. When we make decisions for this lake system, certain things like fish stocking, fishing regulations, that falls on me. Certain things like maintenance of the campground spots, that falls on Nathan. Food plots, some prescribed fires, that falls on Doug in the wildlife management area. Lake restoration related stuff, that's Michelle and her team. When we make decisions that affect everything, so that includes shoreline projects, dredging, we do that by consensus. And we all work together on that and make sure that we're seeing everything from each other's point of view, making sure that, what we're doing is the right thing, we're heading in the right direction, we're not gonna, at least trying to mitigate any potential negative impacts we might have. So thank you for having us and letting us come talk about it. Happy to do it anytime. Yes?
I live on the lake. I wanna know how this dredger, you guys paying by the cubic yards that you pumped out, by the hour, by what?
Okay, so
I've
the
got
question,
video of them sitting there, not fucking running forever, and you guys still paid them in full. The lake was fine before you guys dredged it. It was fine. Now I look out my window and I see a forest. I have been told not to maintain that field. I don't care. I'm gonna mow it because I wanna see the lake.
so the
I don't
dredgers,
care about what goes on outside of Blue Lake. I live on the lake.
I understand that. The dredgers got paid based on the yards removed. They weren't paid an hourly rate.
We have video for 2
What
weeks.
did they remove? Because they sat there forever and didn't run.
Yeah, that's true. We have the video for that.
Well, okay, so I guess I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but here's the normal process. They show up, they mobilize. That takes a little while because everything comes in on semis. They put things together. They get everything fired up. They'll dredge. They may shut down once in a while. Towards the end, when they were dredging, as that containment site was filling up, that return water wasn't meeting water quality goals. So we have to shut down for a little while, let that sediment settle out, and then we can pump a little bit more water in, let the sediment out, let the water return. So there are times, like downtimes. That's very typical in a dredging operation. We do not pay them by the hour, we pay them by the quantity. And it's on them to get it done in a time where they can, be profitable doing it. Yeah.
They did have an ultimate completion date that they couldn't exceed. So what they do in the middle of their time of the contract was on them.
Even when it goes down south to Council Bluffs and dredges that and just leaves us alone.
Yeah.
Not down my call.
That actually happens too.
So when they left, they were done dredging.
No, they weren't.
The boss went to Council Bluffs.
I
Yeah.
watched it. And then you guys tell me you got no funding, but you can remove 1,000 trees and replant new ones. You guys closed down campsites, for what? Because it flooded, and now we've got no water, and we can't even get to the lake to fish.
We don't have water in a lot of places.
I don't care.
That dredge never left the lake until they were done. I mean, that's the dredge machine. They have a lot of different people that come in and out and run it, but the machine never left the lake until they were done.
We know that.
I know that, but it sat there outside my house.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it probably did sit there for a while. Like I said, they fire up, they shut down. I'm not sure what else to say about that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Kathy Cummins, and I guess it sounds like you're doing what you can do, but without water, you really aren't gonna make a lot of progress. My question is, why do you not deal with South Dakota? Because they aren't short of water for their recreation, but they don't let it go downstream. We need water too, and that's the only resource you have, and we're not very far from the Missouri River. And height and level on that would help the situation.
So I think maybe what you're talking about is a reservoir on the Missouri River?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, up above us.
Well, I can tell you that is, well beyond my, authority. Those are federal waters.
That is you have to have a water source. And that, for us, is the water source if you could get the cooperation of South Dakota.
Well, the number one priority right now on the Missouri River, according to the Army Corps of Engineers, is navigation. And they're gonna continue to do what they have to do to provide navigation. That, I can't do much about. Yes, ma'am.
I was up till a few years ago, that campground was full. You couldn't get a spot at the campground
Yep.
the same day. You had to, and then they went and shut down all those places that occasionally did flood, because I camped there and I know they did flood,
Yeah.
but they were full too.
Yeah.
Now, nobody's there. There's no DNR near there, there's no camp post. Why are they letting all that revenue go? Why aren't they keeping the campground these times?
I'm gonna let Nathan answer that. He's the park manager.
So my name's Nick Faust, I'm the new park manager, I got here August 30th of last year. So roughly I have about 1,800 hours in, for parks. I've been told I'm working too much, so they tell me not to work as much. I've been getting a lot of comp time because I'm with Resource 2. I grew up here at Browns Lake, went to Westwood, went to college at South Dakota State for 3 years, worked in Okoboji for 3 summers, and then I came back here as a state park manager at Lucent Park State Park. So I have myself invested in it as well. I grew up here. I did the same thing as you guys. I camped there. I boated there. I fished there growing up. I loved the place. It was super enjoyable for me. So I came back here. The situation that I got put into, the park, I agree. Some of the stuff was not as well maintained as some other parks in the state, and I fixed all those problems. Equipment's being maintained now. The grass is getting mowed at least once a week to twice a week, where it's enjoyable for the campers. Then I'm not bugging them when I'm mowing next to their sites as well. So everything's being string trimmed. The campground should be clean. If you guys haven't been there in a while, I encourage you to come. The office phone number will get me, as well as my cell phone number. I have cards with me if anybody would like them. If you guys see anything that would like to be changed, just let me know, and we can change some stuff. We can switch some stuff up. If you don't like something that I'm doing, just come tell me. I'm always open to changing things. But to my knowledge, we're updating the park a lot.
Are you there all the time?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Okay, because somebody at one, I think it was last year or year before, they said it's between here and Stone Park.
Yes, ma'am. So there was a split manager before I got there. Then I filled the manager position at Lewis and Clark State Park. So I'm at Lewis and Clark State Park full time. I usually work 40 hours a week is what they allow me to work, and some weeks is more than that, and then some weeks are less than that. So I'm fluctuating my hours between that, but normally 40 hours a week. Right now I have 6 seasonals hired. So they're putting in as many hours as they can. They can work up to 40 hours a week as well, but along with ball games and stuff like that. So we're flexible on their schedules, but at all times I have somebody at the park. From 8 to 4:30, I have seasonals mowing and doing a lot of work that I just don't have time to do. Some smaller jobs like mowing and string trimming and stuff like that, and I do the more extensive job with some experience that I've gained over the years. So we always have people at the park. The visitor center is usually open from Wednesday to Sunday, 9 to 4, so we're trying to keep it open. Staffing is sometimes a problem with that, but I always have a seasonal to come up there and sit. Just that's one more seasonal we could have out in the field, help me out with some other things too. But I do have some knowledgeable seasonals at Lewis and Clark State Park. We have been running a few tours for college groups and school groups around here. Anybody that calls, we try to accommodate people to come in and out. I'm not as knowledgeable with Lewis and Clark yet. I'm trying. I'm working on that. I usually don't have a whole lot of time between this job and farming and odds and ends. But yeah, I'm getting more knowledgeable in Lewis Park as well. But when it comes to the campground, that's one thing that I want to hit on a little bit. Most weekends, we're about 75% occupied. Memorial Day, we were booked out for about 3 or 4 months. I had a lot of phone calls for that one, so that one's been super busy. Looks like this weekend, as of right now, we're about 3/4 full, so I haven't seen a very low campground since I've been there, since August 30th or so. Last year might have been a little bit different, might have been a little lower camping numbers, but this year, as far as I know, so far, we've been pretty good in the campground. I've always got people there. I've got a camp host full time. They're heading out July 5th, and then I'm getting a new camp host in. But they take care of the shower building with me. They're always walking around, doing nightly checks. So I've had a lot of good reviews on them this year so far. But any other questions? I mean,
What about opening up those other sites that were closed down?
that's something that we've tossed around. There's a lot of work that goes into that as well. But we're looking at something like that. Right now, it's built with native fir.
Have you pulled the electrical from those sites already?
That I can't answer that. I don't know.
You have.
Yeah.
That old settlers group meeting that was there, I can't think what they, every year they were there for 3 or 4 days on a weekend.
Who is the Republican?
Why did we stop that?
So that was before my time. Like I said, I came here in August.
Or somebody here should be able to answer, why did we stop that?
That I don't have an answer for. I haven't been in contact with anybody since I got here.
You walked around that museum or
Yes, sir, my office is up in the museum.
the north side is missing the same piece
Yes,
of the
sir.
siding for 5 years now?
Yes, sir, we got a project on
Make
this.
all the money to put one piece up there, make it look good.
Yes, sir, we got a project on this fall, that we're gonna redo a lot of the outside, a lot of windows leak as well. So we're gonna do a lot of the outside construction, as well as the inside, the HVAC is causing us some issues right now. So we have a project for the inside for heating and cooling, to make sure we don't freeze pipes in the winter time, and then it'll be cold sometime in the winter, stuff like that. We have all that in the works. We got all that on my mind, for sure. As long as-
I think pretty sure they've already pulled the electric.
Yeah, that's something that I just don't know if I haven't been able to say or something like that. But I know there's not a post out there.
What are they doing with the keelboat?
With the keelboat inside or outside?
The one that's sitting outside, that just seems to be rotting away.
Yep, so we're looking at options with that. Right now, we're tossing up some ideas and how we can use it or how someone could use it as an exhibit wherever. Right now, we have one on the inside, the one on the outside, I don't quite know what we can do with it in our wise in that part. So I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the trailer as well. The trailer's gonna need some work along with the boat when it's been sitting for something like that for that long.
Get
So,
it undercover, no.
absolutely, I agree. We just don't have anywhere that can fit a boat that size. So,
Well, that's why I like a building, just put a port, canopy over the top of it or something.
and that's something to look at, absolutely. Look into something like that.
Just, it's saddening to drive by and see it rotting, the tarps flapping.
I agree. There's a lot of stuff that I've been trying to do since August 30th, without a doubt. But we get a set budget every year as well, and it's tough to bring the park back to 100% my standards, and do it all in 1 year. I got some constraints of what I can and can't do there. But no, I agree. We can look into something like that.
Thanks, Nathan. I think it's worth mentioning, when your seasonals are not around, it's a one-man show.
Yeah, so through the winter time, all my seasonals usually go out with it in school. I have some that can stay later, but August is about the time the seasonals go back to school. So I'm by myself between August and then whenever I can get my first seasonal. This year I was fortunate enough to have some out of school, so they could come help me a little bit earlier, but usually it's middle of May.
Would volunteers be able to man the retreat center?
Yeah, I would love volunteers. I've reached out to a few places already of trying to get some help with. I haven't reached out to you. Absolutely.
Get a
So,
sign up sheet at the door, huh?
yeah. So anybody that would ever like to call or email Filestrom, Nathan Filestrom, Filstr. Yeah, I got a card as well. And everybody can sneak by after I brought a bunch of cards. And then the office phone at the phone number, that'll always get me at the visitor center there. I always check that. And then seasonal check that as well. But yeah, volunteers we always love. I had a hard time getting some volunteers with the ice storm that we had this past winter. We had about a month of as many seasonals as I could find in me picking up sticks and bark from a lot of the trees that fell down. So we we had a lot of work cut out for us, and I tried to find some volunteers for that, and didn't have a lot of success.
The visitor center is open 9 to 4, you say?
Yes, ma'am, 9 to 4 usually, yep.
And we got a question up top there in the back. Yes, sir.
You showed how, on other lakes that have been hydraulically dredged, how when we pump the water back in, the water levels usually stay about the same. Has there been any, Blue Lake had issues pumping the water back in, so not as much water was pumped in as was originally planned? Has there been any other lakes where something like that has happened? And like a study of that, like maybe how that affected the lake and how did that negatively affect where the water is at now?
So the question is related to, okay, other lakes that have pumped water, have we had any lake issues where we've had negative impacts from that?
So like how there was the pump to bring the water back and slip it back in and we had to stop pumping, there was an issue with that. Is that
Yeah.
something that's different? Has that happened at another lake?
No, oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, so the question related to having to stop pumping, the pump that we had at Blue Lake due to that Kona depression forming.
Yes.
Have we had that happen, at other lakes? Good question. I have it in my district, and the reason is that, the water supplies that we get for Snyder Bend and Browns Lake that I showed as an example, that comes from a surface water intake out of the Missouri River proper. So those are not, wells in the ground. So there is a kind of, direct connection right there. I don't have any other areas in my district, that have those groundwater wells, pulling water out at the rate, the Blue Lake does. So I don't have another example for you where that's happened. Yeah. Oh, Michelle.
So my name is Michelle Palmer, I'm the Lake Restoration Program Coordinator, and I can speak a little bit to your question as well because we're involved with a lot of the hydraulic projects across the state. Blue Lake's actually pretty unique in that we actually had a groundwater well here, and that's really atypical for any of the hydraulic projects that we've held over the last 20 years elsewhere in the state, in that we had some ability to add some supplemental water. The vast majority of our projects where hydraulic dredging has taken place, we don't have those same capacities. And in some cases, we don't even have a return water line directly from the spoil site to the lake. So the return is a lot lower and we have to monitor some of our water level changes a lot. I have not in my experience experienced like negative impacts to water level as a result of hydraulic dredging in any of the projects that we've been involved with. And I would say since the start of the program for hydraulic dredging, we're talking like 10 to 12 projects overall. So we've got a fair number that we can pull from for experience.
Bill.
What is, if you had the budget to pump, Blue Lake, okay? What would the daily cost be monthly, what would be the daily monthly cost be to operate that pump if you had A to Z perfect conditions, all the money in the world to do it?
Sure.
What would it cost you monthly, weekly, daily to run that pump?
Yeah, so the question was, if we could run the pump nonstop, given the conditions, what would it cost? We have that number, it's about $6,000 a month to run that. I think during the last time there was a long pumping effort, I think the park manager at that time spent about $40,000. Or you spent about $40,000 of the
We ran it for 2 months before ice up this fall, starting in October, ran it through into December, and then we had to shut it down because we were getting ice on the water for safety concerns. We ran it also last fall. We were able to add 2 feet of water in both instances. We lost a foot of the water that we gained over the winter. So we have actually turned the pump on a couple of times since the dredging project in an effort to add water where we can. We have not been able to sustain those water level gains, they're short terms.
As soon as we start stacking water in that lake, it goes back out. And that's a lot of money to spend, $6,000 a month. The budgets are stretched in. Yeah.
When the pump cavitates, when the pump burns out, what is the cost to replace the pump?
What is the cost to replace the pump when the pump burns out? Jeff, what was that?
When we upgraded the water line, 1.2 miles or whatever, it was corrugated metal pipe and we updated it to an HDPE or plastic pipe. It was about $500,000 just for the pipe. We retained the original pump structure because it was in pretty good shape. if I had to take a wild shot in the dark, it'd be $500,000. But I am not an engineer, I'm a lake scientist, so I would not put a lot of salt or like a lot of stuff in that number.
So,
Well, I don't wanna use it.
so with low water levels, it's advantageous to be cautious.
Yes, and
So that
regardless,
you don't burn up a $500,000 pump.
I mean, no matter what we do, we're still limited by the groundwater supply, not necessarily the infrastructure of the pump. We've got the pump in pretty good shape where we can operate it. It just doesn't always make sense to us.
Well, in fear of losing $500,000, that wouldn't have been the switch either.
So, I'm Jeff Phelps, I'm
Jeff-
the engineer.
Jeff's a better person to answer
I
this
would be the
question.
one that actually rebuild the pump if needed. In the case of Blue Lake, when you talk about a pump burning out, unless the casing that's going down in the ground were to fail, what we did when we put the new pipe in, we simply replaced the impeller on the pump itself. So we just pull it up out of the ground, we ran a camera down, we checked the casing, we put a new impeller on it. We put some new controls in the building so we can run that pump at a lower level. So what Ben's talking about, at Blue Lake, when we put an impeller in, we can read off of a graph, I'm trying to not get too nerdy here, but we can read off a graph and say, hey, at full power, we can pump about 2,500 gallons a minute, theoretically, which is why Ben talked about a flow meter that we need to put in. When we were pumping full 60 hertz, full gallons a minute out there during that dredging operation in July when it started cavitating, Heine Richards here in town are the ones that helped us out. They came out and said, you know, it is cavitating. We're gonna drop that down to what theoretically is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000. We don't really know where it's sitting exactly. It's hard to read off of a graph. But, so we dropped that down, and that's how we prevent from burning it up. If that
What
makes
is the overall expense in maintenance of a pump?
Yeah.
When you have substrate water tables where they are couple-sized grouts, the inherent risk of burning up a $500,000 pump, and this is just a mere management of the pump itself as an asset, if you replace the impeller. Shoot me a number, what's the
$50,000 to
cost?
pull that.
What was it?
$50,000 to pull it.
Just to replace the impeller, correct? 50 grand. Thank you.
Well, we've been at this for about an hour and 15 minutes. I see we're starting to lose some people here. So, I'll tell you what, we'll end this portion of it. I'll hang around for a little bit if anybody wants to come up to me and like ask questions or talk to any of us. But I just really want to thank everybody for coming and giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with y'all. Thank you.